Hi, my name is Mick Cooper, and I'm going to be doing an introduction to pluralistic counselling and psychotherapy. This is about the third time I've started, and I'm hoping it's going to work. I'm a bit new to this technology. I didn't know how to do to switch between me talking and the slides. So you're just going to get the slides. You saved from pictures of me, but I thought I'd just put a picture of myself so you know who's actually talking to you. Picture of me with my two oldest girls looking slightly bemused by why they need to have a picture of their dad. But anyway, that's us down on Brighton Beach in slightly happier times. I'm just doing this as the coronavirus is really kicking in and people are self-isolating. So I wanted to put some materials out there that people could access and use as their CP. If you're interested in pluralistic practice, what I would say is please, please, please go to our pluralistic practice website. We've got some brilliant blogs there. You've got a video of John McLeod talking about the pluralistic approach, and it's a really kind of vibrant community of different people, lots of voices, not just me or John talking about it, but lots of other people kind of contributing, sharing ideas about pluralism, some critiques as well, which is great, people kind of raising issues with it. It's really lively discussions, and I think you'll find that really interesting. It's kind of the cutting edge of what's going on in the field. But I wanted to start by talking a bit about the developments and where pluralism came from, and kind of why it evolved in the first place. Um, and I think probably one of the things to say is, the starting point is to say that pluralism didn't come out, one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what's the difference between pluralism and integration in eclectic approaches? And it's a great question. But I think really important to say is pluralism didn't come out of the integrative field. So it wasn't like John and I were integrative or eclectic therapists and then thought, what can we do a bit differently? It really came out of the person-centered field. John and I were both very involved in person-centered world for many years, and I edited the handbook person-centered therapy. Work I did on relational depth was very much embedded in the person-centered field, and I did and still do have an absolute love for person-centered theory and practice. But I guess for me, and I think for John, there was other things. I think we were both very involved in research and looking at the research, which shows really that there's lots of different ways of doing therapy, and really there isn't one most effective approach, although the relationship clearly is very closely associated with good outcomes. And also, I guess there was a kind of postmodern influence. Postmodernism is a philosophy of thinking that, there's not one truth about things. And I think whilst I was really loved the person-centered approach, I was also a bit wary in myself, and maybe saw it a bit in other people, of a kind of person-centered purism that was holding that person-centered was somehow kind of better or truer or more of a kind of insightful than other approaches. And kind of at one level I believe that, I also kind of sensed that there was something wrong in advocating an approach that was about acceptance, about valuing, about empathy. And yet it could also be very critical to other therapists or other views, whether CBT, psychodynamic, that saw things in different ways. I think the other bit of it for me was that with clients, I kind of sensed that maybe not all clients wanted a more non-directive approach. And for me, what I love about the person-centered approach, being as person-centered, is about really focusing on the person and the client. And that kind of meant that maybe different clients are going to want and need different things at different points in time. And that maybe a non-directivity isn't always the best way of working with clients. And some clients might need more input, for instance, or more theories to help them. And so that kind of was something John and I were kind of toying aware of. With Julia and other people, John was setting up a research centre at the University of Abertay, where he was based. In the mid-2000s. I mean, so we talked about these ideas, and we came up with a kind of therapy that would be mainly person-centered, but drawing on different ideas and different practices, if that was appropriate. And also, and I think John particularly emphasised this, that there really needed to be a kind of collaboration at the heart of it. That it shouldn't be the therapist saying, well, I think we should use this approach or we should use that approach, but really the integration should be centered around what client and therapist together feel is the best approach for that particular client. And that's not, and I'm really going to keep on emphasizing this in the talk, that that's not saying that you just say to the client, what do you want, and you do that, because clients sometimes don't know what they want. Sometimes what they want is not what they need. As therapists, we have some great ideas a lot of the time about what is most helpful for clients, but it's about a dialogue. It's about a dialogue and working together and thinking together with clients about what might be helpful for them. So we did a first paper on a kind of pluralistic framework in 2007. You can read that. That's on the Pluralistic Practice website. We did our book, which is still kind of, I guess, the core text in many ways. It'd be nice to update that one day about pluralistic. And then with Windy, who came on board from a CBT perspective, we did a handbook of pluralistic counselling and psychotherapy, which has got lots of chapters on things like assessment and looking at different problems. And I think it's great. And then we started having conferences, and I think that was a real kind of what's the word? I don't know. Kickstart? No, not kickstart. But I think in terms of bringing things together and developing more of a pluralistic community, John and Kate Smith and colleagues and Julia up at Abate organised the first international conference, because we'd had a few little conferences before that. But we had a first big one up at Abate, which was fantastic in 2018. Really nice getting together, talking, dialogue, really welcoming. And I think for me, that was the key sign that something good was happening and that I was pleased to be part of, is that it was a really welcoming, friendly community. We had a second conference at Roehampton, which again, I think was great. We had John Norcross, colleague of mine, coming along and talking to us, and Lucy Johnston talking from a more political perspective about some of these issues and linking into her power, threat, meaning framework. And we're going to have our third conference in Dublin, which Marcella and Shiona and people have been organising, and we're all absolutely gutted that it's been cancelled due to coronavirus, and it's such a shame. They've put so much work into it, and everyone was really excited. But I guess, you know, pluralism is about being a bit flexible and trying to respond to things. So we're grieving and we're getting on with it and getting on. Finding good ways of doing it. So there's been about maybe 50, maybe a bit more, a bit less kind of books, chapters and journals today. There's been a number of courses as well that have come on board with a kind of pluralistic way of thinking about things, and seem to kind of have put that at the heart of their kind of training. But I think one thing really important to say is that, you know, pluralism is not some brilliant new invention that is out there that nobody ever thought before, that we've come up with some new fantastic ideas. Really what it is an articulation of what lots of people have been doing for a long time, which is thinking about therapy in a way which is very valuing of different approaches, and which is flexible, and thinking about how different clients need different things at different points in time. And I think pluralism kind of puts a label on that, which can be helpful in researching it and thinking more about it. It's put some terminology on that, like shared decision making. Well, we haven't invented the term shared decision making, but kind of linked it to shared decision making. And it's been a real stimulus for research, for activity, for training, and lots of great new ideas, I think, which is really exciting. You know, so more questions than answers, which I think is always a really good sign. And I guess particularly maybe in the time we're in right now, doing this March 2020, with all the kind of changes and chaos to some extent, I think pluralism is pretty nicely suited for it, really, because it is about flexibility, it's about changing, it's about being able to adapt. It's not saying it's better than anything else. There's lots of great things out there, but as a kind of general way of thinking about things, rather than trying to find one truth, pluralism is about being open to lots of different possibilities. And something else I love about pluralism, and I do really love this, is that it's got a real philosophical depth to it, because there is philosophical traditions of pluralism. People like Isaiah Berlin, William James, you can read a bit about him on our website by Jay Bateman's written a blog about him. And it's a kind of idea that stretches across philosophy and religion. There's pluralism, and pluralism always means the same thing, which is about welcoming. I think welcoming, that's maybe the best word for it. It's a kind of welcoming of different ideas, trying to be open, trying to think about things in a kind of non-dogmatic, non-rigid way. Being able to bring in different things, but it's also about, it's not about just being kind of relative and saying, well, everything's the same and nothing matters. It's about trying to be open, but also having our own perspective. You know, someone who's a religious pluralist doesn't mean they're Jewish and they're Christian and they're Muslim and they're Buddhist and Hindu. You know, they may well have one, and they're likely to have one particular religion, that they're Jewish or they're Christian. But the pluralism bit means that they're really open to the positions that other people hold, that they recognize that if you're Jewish but you're a pluralist, you recognize that Christian people have their beliefs and they believe passionately in their beliefs, and we can talk about it, but there's no really one right answer. We're not trying to convince the other person that we're right and they're wrong, that we can see the validity of different positions. And pluralism is a real recognition of that multiplicity of validity. Can you say that? The validity of multiple positions. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so because pluralism tries to move beyond schoolism, and that in many ways is at the heart of it. You know, that the therapy world from uh, Jung and Freud onwards has always kind of had schools, and schools can be fantastic. I mean, what Jung did, amazing body work. Freud, amazing. You know, all these schools can create and have generated incredible knowledge. Carl Rogers, Byrne, Pearls. The problem is, though, I guess from a pluralistic standpoint, is when schools translate into schoolism, when it becomes a dogma, when it's not just about saying, look, here's some great ideas, but it's saying, here's some great ideas, and these ideas are better than your ideas, where there's a kind of assumed monopoly on the truth, and that there's one reason that is explained, whether it's conditional positive regard, or whether it's internal conflicts, or whether it's kind of script problems. You know, when it becomes one thing and one model that is posited as the truth, and that one treatment becomes the way, not just a way, but the way of treating problem. And you know, why is that not helpful? Well, it's not helpful in terms of conflicts between our field, and that means we don't learn from each other. I mean, some level of difference is great, and some level of positioning is great, but when it has that real dogmatic element, then I think it moves beyond being helpful. But most importantly, I think it's unhelpful for clients. You know, if you're a client and you're coming to see a therapist who dogmatically believes that one treatment and their treatment is going to be the best for that client, you know, they can end up sticking to it and trying to deliver it when actually it's not the right thing. You know, you might have a client who comes to a person-centered therapist and really wants advice and wants guidance and wants some ideas about how to deal with their problems. And if you've got someone who's very dogmatically non-directive and saying, look, you know, this is about your external locus of evaluation, or thinking that, I probably wouldn't say that, and it is working on that, then the person could go through weeks, months, years of therapy. I mean, people spend years in psychoanalysis when maybe actually that's not the best therapy for them. Maybe someone who wants direction and guidance and advice would actually be better off seeing a CBT therapist or a short-term therapist who could help them focus on those specific problems. And there's a kind of ethical question about being willing, and of course lots of person-centered people are, just as lots of CBT and psychodynamic people are, being willing to say, well, okay, you know, you come to see me and I can do this. And it's not about the person-centered person being able to deliver CBT, but it's about kind of recognizing the limits of their approach, rather than being in a schoolless position of this is right, this is the best, and you're going to get what I offer because I know that it's the truth. That isn't helpful. You know, that's when schoolism becomes unhelpful. I know from the evidence base that different therapies suit different people at different times, and that people want different things. So if you ask, for instance, depressed clients, studied by Mike King and colleagues, asked people who are depressed and gave them vignettes of non-directed counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy, and asked them which of those prefer. What they found, about 40% wanted non-directed counselling, about 60% wanted CBT, that there was a real range in people's preferences. We had a study actually which found there were some gender differences there. You can probably guess which way around it went, that the men wanted CBT more than the women. So, you know, but again, there was a lot of variation within those genders. It wasn't that all the women wanted non-directed counselling, all the men wanted CBT. There was a lot of variation and a lot of difference. Now, something else, this is from our inventory of preferences, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And one of the things we do in this inventory of preference, we ask clients questions like, okay, would you like your therapist to allow the therapy to be unstructured, or would you like them to give structure to therapy? And we ask lots of questions along those kind of dimensions to see what people's preferences are. We've asked lay people, we've asked kind of good representative populations, we've asked people who are just coming into therapy. And what we find is variation. We find difference. We find that there's a real range of responses. So on this structured, unstructured dimension, I mean, I was surprised by this. You know, as a mainly person-centered therapist, I'd like to think that most clients want therapy to be unstructured. But actually what we found again and again and again is that more clients want structured therapy. But there's some clients who definitely want therapy to be unstructured. And there's some clients who really want structure in their therapy. And these clients are probably going to do better. I'll talk about the research in a minute, but these clients are probably going to do better in different approaches. Now, we could say, you know, that those who are saying that they want therapy to be unstructured, well, you know, actually they'll realize once they get a bit of guidance advice that that's right for them. And you know, that's part of their problem, is that they like things to be unstructured. Or the other way around, we could say, well, look, okay, all these people are saying that they want structure in therapy. But really that's about an external locus of evaluation. That's because they're looking for other people to tell them what to do. And really, you know, give them a bit of non-directed therapy. And they'll realize that actually they can find their own answers. And actually we've done some research and there's some truth to the latter one. Certainly that we have found one or two people saying that actually once they got into a more non-directive approach, they liked it. But, you know, I think there's a real danger that we get into a more kind of therapist, expert-based approach when we start, I think, what's the word? Gaslighting. I always get it's torchlighting or something, but gaslighting almost clients, pathologizing clients, saying, well, you think you want that, but really I know what you want. And particularly from a person-centered perspective, if we're really going to be person-centered, then I'm really uneasy about the position of saying, well, you know, a client comes in and they say they want structure, and we think, well, they're saying that, but really what they need is something more unstructured. So I think we need to listen to what clients want and respect that. If a client is saying, I really want to have structure for therapy, it's not that we just do that, it's not that we just change what we offer, but we listen to that and we engage with that and we talk to clients about that. This is another one about whether a client wants to focus on life in the present or life in the past. And again, you can see there's real variation. Some clients come into therapy and they really want to focus on past experiences and look at their childhood and really go into it deeply. But we get other clients coming into therapy who say, actually, I don't want to look at my past, or I've looked at my past and I feel like I've gone as far as I want to go. I want to focus on the present and coping styles and how I deal with things. And again, you know, we can say, all right, someone doesn't want to look in the past, but that's because they're in denial and actually that's what they need to do. Or somebody doesn't look in the present and they're just, you know, it's always easy to kind of pathologize clients and think that they're doing it wrong. But pluralism, I guess, wants to come from that place of really valuing clients. And that's not just that clients always know what they want, but kind of trusting clients to have some ideas about what it is that's going to work for them, and being able to talk to them about that and engage with that. And of course, that's going to vary across clients. I mean, one of the things I think we're learning is that clients who have previous experience in therapy, and there's certainly a lot of those clients out there now, a lot of people who come to us who have previous experience in therapy, they're probably going to have better ideas about what's going to work for them than somebody who's completely new to therapy. Somebody who's completely new to therapy, and you say to them, what do you want from therapy? You know, it may well be that they just get a bit thrown. Or research shows that some clients can feel a little bit overwhelmed by those kind of questions. Particularly, you know, if you give someone a kind of blank sheet of paper and just say, what do you want? So, you know, clearly clients vary themselves in how much they can or want to be involved. You know, some people also want more control around things and around things like therapy than others, and that's going to make a difference as well in terms of what therapy is going to mean for people. So there's differences, but from a pluralistic standpoint, we want to listen to clients. We want to kind of engage in dialogue. Not about saying, uncritically saying, yeah, you're absolutely right, but it's also about not uncritically negating, about having, because we do know that clients who get their preferred therapies do a bit better. I mean, the evidence is mainly on things like whether clients prefer medication or psychotherapy rather than on specific therapeutic activities, and that's still something that we're kind of going into. But what the research shows is that where clients get their preferred treatments, they are a lot less likely to drop out of therapy. That's the big one. So what we might expect is that if a client comes into therapy and says, I really want something structured, I really want direction and guidance and advice, then it's possible that they could get something unstructured and they go, wow, that's great. I'm really recognizing that that's the right thing for me. But what can also happen, and what the research would suggest, is that what may well happen is the client, after a few sessions, just thinks, this isn't right for me. And actually, even though that might have been a benefit for them, if they drop out, then it's not going to be of benefit in the long term. Slightly improvement in outcome. I mean, it's similar to the research in shared decision making. So what's nice about pluralism and talking about preference accommodation is that it relates to a lot of literature on shared decision making in the healthcare setting. And what you find actually is that you don't get radical improvements in where people share decisions with their doctors around maybe kind of treatment for cancer or for conditions like diabetes. But what you get is you get more satisfaction, you get people more engaged, you get a little bit better outcomes perhaps. And I think that's what we see around preference accommodation and assessment, that pluralistic therapy, we've looked at the outcomes, does fine, not brilliantly better than anything else, about the same, but we found good levels of engagement, good levels of satisfaction. Therapists seem to like it, seem to feel engaged with it. It certainly has its challenges in terms of how they think about pluralism and but also kind of they like, I think in my experience, and of course, people are going to say more likely to say positive things to me, but I think in my experience, people who've been practicing in a pluralistic way, they like it. There's a kind of openness to it. There's a kind of freshness and a freedom to it that people seem to like. So let's think about some core principles of the pluralistic. As I was saying, that pluralism is really about trying to get away from schoolism. And it's also about trying to get away from a kind of pluralistic schoolism. And that's one of the things I really love about the pluralistic community, is people are kind of, I don't know, questioning about it. I mean, we like it, and I do love it, but I'm also kind of questioning about it, and I kind of recognizing that practicing in a pluralistic way is going to suit some clients more than others. I mean, it would be crazy to get in a kind of dogmatic pluralism. That pluralism is best and everyone's got to be a pluralist. And, if you're not a pluralist, you're not a proper therapist. That would be a contradiction in terms. And that's one of the challenges, really, is kind of holding a position whilst also being critical about it. And, we try to do things like on our pluralistic website. You can see some real critiques and welcoming critique. Sometimes it doesn't feel great. At a personal level, people kind of critiquing your ideas, but trying to welcome that and embrace that and have dialogues with that, and just not getting kind of stuck in positions, but really trying to always keep therapy based around what clients want, client benefit. So it's about holding a kind of critical, self-reflective stance towards our own theory and personal assumption. One of the things that we're taught on our counselling courses is about being reflective, being aware, recognizing where we're coming from on our own biases. But I think something that we don't get taught, I certainly never got taught in my training, was also recognizing my investment in my identity as a therapist. I mean, I trained as an existential therapist and did some person-centered training. But most of my training was on an existential course. And, we were never taught to, we were never taught to see existential therapy as one approach amongst the sea of other really effective approaches. I mean, there was a kind of a thing about this is the way. And I think reflecting on the fact that, and I can understand why, because you train in an approach and you commit to an approach and you spend years, nobody wants, if I trained for years as an existential therapist, I'm not particularly going to want to hear news or things saying existential therapy is not very effective, clients saying it's not very effective, that I'm going to have certain defense mechanisms towards that. For instance, I'm going to say, well, okay, maybe they didn't engage with it properly, or, that it wasn't, that somehow I didn't deliver it in the right way, so that existential therapy is really effective. But that kind of willingness to look at our own investments, and that there's an emotion there as well. There's an emotion. It's not some kind of cold, rational thing that I just, existential therapy is better because Heidegger said that. And that there's a personal, emotional investment. If I see some research that shows that existential therapy is not very effective, I kind of get a bit of a heart sink. I get a bit of a heart sink when I see something saying directive approaches If I see something saying directive approaches are more effective, what that shows to me is that there is some kind of emotional allegiance there. And we know how powerful that can be in the research itself. And I think it's something that we need to be honest about and look at. Anyway, so pluralism is about trying to get away from that, trying to have an approach which is going to be best for the client, and to get away from kind of black and white dichotomies in our field, so that we can really engage with our clients in all their complexity and individuality. Getting away, it's ironic that a lot of our therapies are exactly about that. They're about challenging black and white thinking and seeing that as the kind of root of a lot of problems in clients, whether it's CBT ideas of all or nothing thinking, or psychodynamic ideas of splitting, or person-centered ideas of not being fluid. And yet we do often have dichotomies in our field about, what's the most effective therapy? Is it practice A or practice B? Well, maybe practice A suits some clients some of the time, and practice B suits some of the time as well. Is therapy about the relationship, or is it about teams? Well, again, maybe the reality is that for some clients, relational factors are really, really important. But let's not go and assume that it's the relationship that heals, it's a relationship that heals, it's a relationship that heals, as Yalom says, because actually that may not be true for some clients some of the time. It may be that for some clients, techniques are really important, and we should respect that and recognize that that can be a reality as well. To be single orientation, or is it better to be integrative? Well, again, maybe we can be in the position of saying that for some clients, really purist approaches, pure form approaches, or I should say, so pure form CBT, or a pure form person-centered, or a pure form psychoanalytic, is exactly what they need. But for other clients, maybe more flexible and maybe more integrative approaches, what they need. There's no evidence to show that integrative and eclectic approaches are necessarily superior in their effectiveness. So again, rather than getting into dichotomies, let's work from the assumption that maybe there's different things that can help different clients at different points. So that's one of the kind of core assumptions about pluralism. We can talk about different kinds of pluralism, and Wendy and I talk about this in the introduction to the handbook of Pluralistic Counselling and Psychotherapy. Basic assumption number one, as we know from the research, probably lots of different things can be helpful to clients. Dodo, you might have heard of the Dodo bird verdict from the research that, when they test different therapies or against each other, most of them do pretty well. And, there's no kind of one thing. It's from Alice in Wonderland, the Dodo bird verdict. Everybody is one, all must have prizes. Let's assume that lots of different things can be helpful to a client. Not to say that everything is. There's approaches that I don't like. Things which are very, very kind of directive and controlling, and some of those approaches I don't like. But in the main, but though that's really about the ethical issues, and ethical approaches there's probably lots of different ways that therapies. And then the second thing is a kind of pluralism across the therapeutic dyad. So, if we want to know what's going to be helpful, let's talk to clients about it. Let's have a dialogue with clients, let's engage with clients, let's think together with clients about what might be helpful for them. Pluralism is about seeing different perspectives. So we're seeing different perspectives across therapies, that's our first assumption, and then different perspectives across the therapy. Now, really importantly, and one of the things that we've kind of emphasized in the pluralist approach is that pluralism can be both a general attitude and it can be a specific practice. So you can have pluralistic philosophy and then you have pluralistic practice. Now, if you're going to practice in a pluralistic way, you kind of need to have the philosophy, but you can have the philosophy without a specific pluralistic practice. And that's really important when we think about how pluralism individual therapies. So pluralistic philosophy is the belief that different clients are likely to benefit from different things at different points of time. So that should probably actually say a kind of openness to the idea that different clients are likely to benefit. We don't know. It might be that somebody one day comes along and says, here's therapy X, and therapy X is the most effective therapy for everyone all the time. We're not at that point now. What our research shows is that there's lots of things out there, and probably there's individual differences. We don't really know what those individual differences are, but we're kind of beginning to sense a bit some of the individual differences, like more reactive clients who don't like being told what to do better in non-directive therapies. Clients who are more compliant tend to do better in approaches like CBT. So we got a kind of what's called a therapy pluralism inventory you can download from our Pluralistic Practice website. And that has items like I believe lots of therapies have got much to offer. I don't believe there's only one approach. I think there's one approach that suits most clients. That kind of indicates a less pluralistic attitude. So you can use that, and you can where you stand on that. And then we have the practice. And the practice is more around kind of working specifically in that way that is then tailored specifically to the client, and there's conversations and draws on different approaches. So that's things like kind of exploring the way you work with each client, tailoring the work, being collaborative with clients, and you can see the reference for that paper led by Alison Thompson there. The important bit is that these two areas are distinct. Now there is some overlap, but actually it's kind of, we didn't find a correlation that was strong, about 4% overlap. So that means that people can hold a pluralistic philosophy without practicing and practice without philosophy. But critically, what that means is, say you're person-centered and you're thinking, well, I can't be pluralist. Well, actually, if you're person-centered, you could still hold that philosophy. You could still hold those kind of beliefs that different clients benefit from different things at different points in time. It's just that what I do is a person-centered way of working. That's absolutely fine. And that's different from a kind of person-centered schoolism, which is where you start saying, you know, the person-centered approach is the best for clients. A person-centered practice within a pluralistic philosophy holds that this is what I do. I offer this. You know, this is maybe all I want to be doing because I love the person-centered way of working, and it really means a lot to me. Or that's all I'm trained in. And certainly when you start off, of course, you can't be trained in lots and lots of different approaches. You need to start somewhere, and maybe that's where you will stay. And that's not a bad thing, just staying in one approach necessarily. But it can still be within a pluralistic philosophy of saying, this is what I do, but I really value other approaches, and I can recognize their strengths, I can recognize my limits as well as my strengths, and I'm willing to refer on. Now, just going back to the question about kind of, you know, so how does that link to integrative eclectic therapy? I said at the beginning that person-centered therapy doesn't specifically come from an integrative eclectic approach, and therefore the kind of the overlap is maybe a little bit messy. There's some things about pluralism that are a bit messy. It's a kind of messy philosophy, as William James said, or a philosophy of messiness. In many ways, you know, when we think about pluralistic practice, that is similar to what you might call a collaborative, integrative way of working. And Biljana van Rijn has, Metanoia has kind of used that term collaborative integrative. And I think that's a pretty good way of describing what pluralistic practice is. It's an integrative practice, but it's really based around that kind of collaborative way of working with clients at the really heart of it. But there is differences between pluralism and integration beyond that. So firstly, what we can say is that you know, some forms of integration, particularly what's called theoretical integration, and you know, great approaches like cognitive analytic therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, you know, these are great therapies, but they're integrative therapies, and they're kind of specific approaches, if you like, that themselves could become schoolish, you know, not necessarily, of course, but that can be that's where they could kind of segue into. Whereas pluralism is more of a kind of an overview and a welcoming of different approaches rather than one specific integrative approach. So that's one of the differences. And I think then secondly, as I was just saying, that pluralism can be this general philosophical attitude. It can be a welcoming, and it doesn't need to mean that you're combining different approaches. When you say you're integrative, pretty much by definition, what you're saying is that you draw on different therapies in your work, and that's fantastic. But pluralism isn't saying that you have to draw on different practices. You could hold that pluralistic philosophy without practicing in an integrative way. And then I think the final thing is, just kind of going back to something else I was saying, is that integrative approaches can be very collaborative. And I think if you look at the work of a lot of integrative therapists or eclectic therapists as well, like Lazarus's work, there is a real emphasis on that dialogue with clients. But it's not inherent. You know, you could be integrative and you could be very therapist-led. Whereas pluralism is about an integrative approach as a practice that is specifically around shared decision making and really invites the client into working out together what is it that you're going to be doing. And I think that's what marks it out as a specific form of pluralist of integrative therapy. Okay, let's think more about then what does pluralism look like as a practice. And I think one of the first things to say, pluralism means really being aware of what we can offer clients and having a kind of recognition. It doesn't, I mean, it doesn't start by saying to the client, here's a menu. You know, if you're a chef, you don't give somebody a menu and kind of randomly ask what they want. What you do is you first think, you know, what is it that I can cook? And in a sense, pluralism, sorry, most of my analogies seem to be about food. But pluralism, you know, really starts by saying, okay, what is it that I can offer clients? And that's an exercise. When I'm doing workshops on pluralism, one of the things that I do is that I invite participants to spend some time thinking about where is it I can get clients to, and then how do I go about there. So when I think about this for myself, for instance, what is it that I can offer? And I did this based on some notes a while ago. I think that what I offer clients is a chance. What I'm trying to do with clients is to help them feel better, I think, at some level. But it's mainly about kind of finding better ways of doing things. Actually, if I'm honest, it's about kind of trying to identify more rewarding ways of thinking and acting, or kind of talking to yourself or feeling towards yourself. But it is about change. And I think it is about helping clients make better changes for the better. Yeah, yeah. I mean, better is a kind of bit of a dirty word in the therapy because we say, well, better for who? But of course, I mean better for the client. But yeah, I think kind of find better ways of doing things. You know, how do I do that? Well, I think what I do is that I help clients reflect on what's going on. Like I work very phenomenologically, and again, this is just me. I'm just illustrating this process, kind of reflecting on what I do. I think what I do is I help clients reflect on how they're feeling about things, going into their experiences, working out what it is that they feel. Say you're working with a client who gets very upset about their relationship with their partner. So kind of, okay, so what's the feelings that go on, talking about the feelings, what maybe triggers that, what are the thoughts behind it. So we kind of really go into that and we kind of open that up. And maybe it turns out the client, you know, it's something about the client saying, oh, I'm so stupid, and really beating themselves up about things. And then what I guess we do is maybe explicitly, maybe implicitly talk about different ways of doing that, different ways of relating to self. So it might be, for instance, kind of being a bit gentler and a bit more compassionate. Brilliant work by Paul Gilbert on compassion. And kind of finding more compassionate forms of self-talk. And then there's something about the client kind of going out, trying it out, seeing whether that really works, trying it out in the real world, and then we kind of reflect and see how that goes. And I think there's also something about sometimes kind of specifically disclosing. Oh, sorry, you can't read that diagram very well. That's from in vivo, but maybe me just kind of disclosing to clients stuff like a client who's saying, you know, I'm really rubbish. So I might kind of challenge that. I might say, you know, my experience of you, you know, a client who's saying, well, I just beat myself up because I can't connect with people. And I might say something like, well, you know, my experience with you over the time we've been together is that you connect really well with me. And you know, and so there's something about maybe just helping clients feel a bit better about themselves, kind of enhancing their self-worth, that again would feel better. But I think mostly for me, work is about challenging, helping clients find better ways. And I think, you know, the value of me reflecting on that is that I can then think, okay, this is something I can actually share with clients who come to me. I can say, well, look, what we can do here is it can be a space where we can work out together better ways of doing things. We can see if we can find better ways of doing things. You can try them out. We can see if that works, and we can spend some time together doing that. And it also means if a client comes to me and says, right, what I want is I want you to tell me how to improve my life. I can say, look, I'm really sorry, but I don't think actually that's something I can offer. You know, maybe somebody else can offer that, but I think what I can do is help you work out what you are experiencing and what might be better. But so it helps me know kind of what I can do and what I can't do, and begin those conversations about what it is that they want. Now, I have called this meta-therapeutic communication, this kind of process talking to clients. I've had enough feedback about that not being a great term. John talks about it as meta-communication. I was talking with a group recently, and they said actually what the term we like is shared decision making, and maybe I should just stick to that and change the slides. But shared is about kind of having adult-to-adult conversations with clients about the therapy process, and how it can be most helpful for clients. So it's those kind of not kind of processing, you know, what's the therapy like for you and what does that mean about other relationships. It's those kind of adult conversations about what can we do together. John Norcross talks about preference assessment and accommodation. That's maybe another way of phrasing it, as a way of kind of personalizing, tailoring therapy to the individual client. Yeah, so but it's those kind of adult to adult communication. Now, why does it need to be explicit? It doesn't need to be explicit, and certainly as therapists, we can be incredibly brilliantly intuitive about what it is that clients want. But sometimes, our intuition can be wrong. And what the research shows generally is that as therapists, we're often pretty poor judges of what is going on for clients. And therefore, sometimes having those explicit communications can help us recognize things that maybe we didn't know. And maybe we intuitively thought one thing. I know certainly when I've looked at things like kind of how I feel after sessions and my ratings of sessions and clients' ratings of sessions, for instance, that often what I think is a really good session, clients don't feel particularly moved by, and equally when clients can come away sometimes thinking that was an amazing session, and actually I'm kind of a bit amused by it, and I genuinely came away thinking that not much happened. And I think one of the risks is that as therapists we can sometimes use our own experiences of kind of what we want and what works, and kind of project that a bit onto clients. And we've done some research. And what we found is that what therapists want when they're clients and what clients want, but who aren't therapists as clients, can actually be quite different. We just recently published on that. So for instance, on this thing about do you want goals or not in your therapy? Now, we know that, as I was kind of indicating before, that most clients, lay people, and you can see that there as those dashed diagonal lines. That most clients are actually wanting to have a focus on specific goals. But if you ask therapists what they want as clients, then actually most of us don't want goals. I mean, I'm a bit mixed about goals. Certainly I hate advice. And when I'm a client, the last thing I want is a therapist giving me advice. But there's a danger that I'm going to project that onto my clients and think, well, I hate advice. So of course they're going to hate advice. The advice is really frustrating and irritating. But actually what we find is a lot of people out there, who haven't been through 3 years training or whatever, actually they really value advice. And so we need to be open and explicitly talk to clients sometimes about what to and as I say again, that's not about just doing whatever client asks for. That's about having a dialogue. When they talk about shared decision making, they see that as a kind of midpoint between what is called a informed choice perspective, which is where you just say to the client, where a doctor just says to the patient, well, here are the options, and these are the kind of repercussions, you decide. At one end of the kind of spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have a kind of paternalism, which says, well, I'm going to decide for you. Shared decision making is not at that kind of informed choice end. I mean, I'm not sure that's a great word, because it does kind of involve informed choice. But it is about dialogue, it's about talking, it's about being able to share that with clients and having a sense together of what you are. This collaboration that we're talking about is not the uncritical acceptance of the client's viewpoints. Clients sometimes, and we've seen this in our research, that sometimes clients say, well, I wanted this at the beginning, but actually halfway through the therapy or later on, that actually changed and I realized that I was wrong. But the danger is you take that and you go, well, that shows that clients actually don't know what they want. And it doesn't. What it shows is that, one client or some clients change their viewpoints. But what we also see is that clients say, it was really good to be asked. And I appreciated being asked. And that where therapists just aren't interested or just assume they implicitly know what clients want, then often that doesn't work either. Clients generally value being asked. And that's partly, if we think about why that is, we can think about 3 reasons why it's good to have these shared decisions. So one of it is the obvious one, which is kind of matching, that clients do sometimes, particularly if they're more experienced, know what works for them. And that if you do something, therefore, if you do the thing that they're saying works for them, then often it does really work. And we see that in our research. Clients come into therapy and they say, they've said things like, I want the therapist to be really proactive, and you get to the end of them and you talk to them about it and they say, yeah, no, that was great because I asked for it and I got it and I know that's what I need. But then the second thing is actually that experience of making a choice in itself can be very empowering. It can be overwhelming, and I think it's really important that sometimes having loads and loads and loads of choices can be too much, and it can feel very overwhelming. So it's not about giving clients a kind of blank sheet of paper and just saying whatever you want. But what we know from the research is a kind of restricted range of choices and some kind of what you call scaffolding, when you say, well, we might do this or we might do this, and then also maybe saying, look, there's no real right answer here. It's really up to you. That kind of approach can be really valuable and help clients feel that they're empowered. And then the third reason why shared decision making can be valuable is because of the impact on the alliance. And it's not the only factor in the alliance. We know that the alliance is the quality of the relationship. The alliance is a really important predictor of good outcomes. And if you're working with a client where you're saying, okay, look, let's work together, let's work, think together about what we want, that's likely to have a positive impact on the alliance, which can then, and clients feeling that they've been welcomed and they've been talked to, which can then have a good impact on the outcomes of therapy. Clients feel more trust. One thing we can do is think about, so when is it that we can have these with clients, and that's something that Fanny Papiani led on some work on. And it's, again, when I do workshops, it's something I invite practitioners to think about is, when could you have these dialogues, and also what is it that you can talk about, and about when might you talk about. So what we find in terms of when, well, clients can have these dialogues even before therapy start, putting information out there about what's available. Might be one way of doing it. And then maybe on a telephone call, just saying something a bit about what you can offer, so that the clients don't even come to an assessment session necessarily if it is really clear that what they want and what you can offer isn't the same thing. Assessment sessions, in my work, if you compared it with, say, a more classically person-centered existential approach, what you would see, where you see the difference is particularly in assessment sessions. So I would typically in an assessment session talk to clients, what's brought them there, and then something about what they'd like to get out of therapy, their goals. We might use the goal form, I'll talk about in a minute. And then some time thinking about, okay, well, what sense do you have of what might be helpful? Have you had previous therapy? What did you find helpful there or not? If not, when you talk to your friends, maybe what's helpful for you or not helpful. So some conversation about that. But a lot of that happens in the assessment session. And then I kind of get on with it. And the other time I think I would talk to clients, particularly have these dialogues, for me personally, is at the start of the session. So client might come in and I might say, okay, so, what would you like to talk about today? And we'll talk about it. Now, if I've got ideas and I think, we were talking about something last week and it'd be really good to continue that, I'll say that to a client and we might talk about that. But I'll try and do it in a way which really allows the client to say, no, actually, I don't want to. That's not what I want to talk about. Within sessions, maybe if there's a rupture, or you get to a point in a session when you feel you're not quite sure what to talk about, might be another time when you might do end of sessions can be good as a review, what's been helpful, what hasn't been helpful. Review points, personally, I find it really useful to kind of build in specific review points so that the client has a kind of dedicated time where they can talk about how things are going, even if I feel that things are going well, so that the client, and sometimes that's been really useful because sometimes I felt things are going really well, and actually for the client there has been issues that has been good to have that time to talk about. Final sessions, our clients possibly seen therapists before may well go on to see other therapists, so having time to review what they've got out of therapy. And then in terms of what clients can talk about, the goals of therapy, what they want to get out. Some people don't like the term goals, maybe aims, objectives, that's probably even worse, isn't it? Directions, that's one that I've written about recently around directionality. The methods, the activities, what you're going to do together, that's obviously a big subject to talk about. The content, it might be that you decided to talk about things, but then what you're going to talk about, you're going to talk about the relationship, you're going to talk about their childhood. That's something that I would often ask at the start of sessions. Understandings, how do we make sense of the problems? That's something that we can do together with clients, their progress and their. And then also, when are we actually talking about? Are we talking about what's happened in the previous session, in the current session? Are we going to talk about the next session, therapeutic work as a whole, things like homework, things about ending? So there's lots that can be talked about in relation to lots of different time frames. Have a look at the paper with Fanny, and that will give you some ideas about where these times are. You might just yourself. So some of the things that I feel that I've been learning about shared decision making, I'm going to call it shared decision making. No one likes the term therapeutic communication. Addressing it from the start, just kind of opening up these questions from the start. Sometimes clients don't have a lot to say, and that's fine. And I absolutely wouldn't push it if clients don't feel that they have much to say. But it's about kind of opening a door where clients feel that if they do have things to say, maybe later on in the therapy, preferences that they want to suggest, that's something they feel that they can do. And then actively inviting clients to share. It's not, I really think the research on deference, client deference in therapy shows that it's not enough just to respond if clients do express preferences, because we know there's a power dynamic. We know it can be difficult for clients to talk about what they want, particularly if they think that the therapist isn't going to like it. So actively inviting clients to share their views can be really important in helping them kind of bring things into therapy. Seeing that this is an ongoing process, clients' preferences can change as therapy goes, and we need to be flexible to that. Although some clients do also say, you know, what's important is that I kind of held to task is a term that I'm kind of using. That you know, I said something at the beginning, and now actually, although I'm kind of pushing against it, actually I want you as the therapist to keep me to track. So if clients do come in and say they want something, but then that seems to change, then I think having that dialogue and saying, you know, I noticed that you're changing this. You said this at the beginning. What would you like to do? Would you like to stick with what we originally agreed, or would you like to change tack? Is really important, because in our research, what we're finding is that it can go both ways. Sometimes clients want to be kind of held to task and want actually to go back and want to be reminded of what they want to talk about. And sometimes what clients want is that they just need to focus on other things. Maybe there's stuff that's come up in their life that they need to focus on. But don't assume that if a client does seem to be changing track, actually they want to. You know, paradoxically, sometimes clients want us to keep them focused and even interrupt them if necessary to keep them focused. Uncertainty, just noticing when, you know, if we're not certain about something, we're not sure, that's often a time when we can go back to the client and say, what would you like here? Or, you know, I'm wondering about whether I should be more challenging on you. What do you think? Or I'm wondering if, you know, these issues seem to be very related to your children. We should talk about children. What do you think? You know, not always, but often that's something we can talk about with clients. Being part of the dialogue. So, you know, bringing ourselves in, bringing our own views and our own thoughts is certainly something we can do. And kind of scaffolding out the options. I say not just giving clients a blank sheet of paper, but being able to scaffolding. Really important is also tailoring the level of shared decision making to the particular client. Some clients we know want more of it, some clients just want to get on with it. And it's not something you should be pushing on clients saying, come on, you know, we need to take some time. I know the doctors sometimes, if it's a kind of chronic condition, I really want to be involved. Sometimes, you know, if my leg's just fallen off or something, you know, I don't want some ambulance person saying, that's interesting. Now, I wonder how you feel about, you know, where we could do that. I just want them to give me the bloody drugs. So, you know, it does obviously vary with the person and position, the issues. And then the last thing is about that I'm going to talk about is using measures. Now, I know a lot of people hate using measures, and therapists are often very wary about using systematic feedback. But it is, you know, again, going back to the restaurant, you know, the way it comes up to me at the end of the meal and says, or during the meal actually, says, how was that food? Most of the time, I'm just going to go, however awful it was, I'm going to go, yeah, it was lovely. If I get a piece of paper where I can give some feedback and I can run off before the clients, not the client, the restaurant sees it. Well, you can't do that in therapy. But I think generally I can specify some things that maybe I couldn't say face to face. And certainly I've seen that with clients, and sometimes they will put things down on paper, both positive, using feedback within therapy can be a useful way of enhancing outcomes. And there's two kind of main kinds of measures. So we've got outcome feedback and so outcome measures are things like the PHQ-9, Core 10 that you might have used. That what they do is that they measure symptoms and that they look at how clients are getting on kind of in their lives. And then you've got process measures, which are more about feedback and feeding back on the therapeutic process itself. Now, in pluralistic field, we've developed two particular measures, I guess, that kind of come out of that. One's an outcome measure, and the first one is it's very simple form, really. What it is, it's a personalised outcome measure. So rather than having kind of standardised items, what we have here is personalised items that we work with the client to think about what are your goals for therapy. And as I say, not everybody likes the term goals, and maybe directions might be better, or aims, but we kind of write that down, and you don't need to write it down. It is just a discussion that you can have with clients. Although we generally find clients like often kind of writing that down and being able to keep track of it. We've done some research. Generally, not all clients, but a number of clients like it. And it invites the client really to focus on what they want to think about, and then we discuss it and agree it in the assessment session, and then they rate it. So we write it down, we type it up, and then every week we come back with it, and it's a chance for clients to just keep track of how they're doing really in relation to their particular goals. What clients have said is that they like it, that it helps them think about what they want. You know, in a way, just setting those goals can be a useful articulation process for clients of what they want. What the downsides is that sometimes clients find it too early, particularly in first sessions, to set goals. Sometimes if they're seeing progress, clients really like it. If they're not seeing progress, clients can find it a bit demoralizing. Maybe once a week, we've been using it every week. Some clients say that's a bit too much. So it kind of needs to be used on an individualized basis, and it's really important, I think, that you know, the client's given the option. And what I used to do is say, here's a form, would you like to use it? And again, that's kind of far too leading. It really needs to be something like, some clients like to keep track of goals, some clients don't like to keep track of goals. Really up to you. There's no right answers. What do you? But we do know clients generally, this is one of our dimensions that we used to use. Clients do want to be involved in goal setting. Goals. There's a video of me using the goals form with an actor, and that will give you an idea. The other measure that we developed is what's called the Keep Norcross Inventory of John Norcross and other colleagues like Gina DeMorta's working on that. And just to say, all these measures are free to use. You can download them from my website or the Pluralistic Practice website, and you can take them, you can use them. You don't need permission, just please don't kind of amend them, because then it's difficult to know what's going on and to keep track. And do let us know how you get on with that. So this is a kind of 18-item measure that asks clients what they want, how they'd like therapy to be. You can use it assessments, ongoing work. We've got 4 dimensions. So one is around kind of therapist directiveness, one's around emotional intensity, one's around past orientation, one's around emotional support versus focused challenge, and then it's got additional preference items. And what it's particularly trying to pick up is preferences. So you can see it here, and again, you can download it from the website to give you an idea of how it works. So it asks the clients these questions like, you know, I would like my therapist to focus on goals, not focus on goals. You then score it, and then for each set of questions, and that will give you an indication of whether the client has strong preferences on those dimensions. And then the idea, but what's important really is it's not about you kind of, client says this and then you go off and do it. It's much more about the kind of basis for a dialogue. I found it really useful. I mean, just to give you one example, I was working with a client and I thought the work was going well. They'd asked for something quite directive, and I thought it was being directive, but when we used it and when we were tracking their outcomes, actually the client was saying, oh, I'm not sure if this is helpful. When they did the form again, that they were saying, and sometimes people ask me, you know, do people change their responses? Actually, we find quite a lot of consistency in people's responses. And this client, like other clients who started off asking for something quite directive, when we reviewed, said, no, I really do want something directive. So I tried to sit forward a bit more, be a bit more directive, kind of encourage the client, prompt the client a bit more. It was a client who'd had some quite difficult experiences in their past, and they were saying, you know, I need to be prompted, I need to be probed a bit if I'm going to talk about it. So I you know, using the feedback, I was more proactive than maybe I would normally be, and it helped the client talk about stuff that they found really difficult to talk about. And they said at the end, yeah, no, I do need to be prompted, I do need to be probed. If you just sit back and you're not kind of questioning me, I'm going to avoid it. I know I'm going to avoid it. And it was useful from the CNET, just reminding me that that was what, and that was what helpful. Just finally, challenges. I mean, one of the issues with shared decision making is obviously clients may not be able to say what they need. There can be lots of unconscious desires. I talk a lot about that in my new book on directionality. You know, and sometimes what clients want is actually an expression of their dysfunctional patterns, and that's certainly a kind of an issue. And that's why the dialogue is really important. But again, I think the fact that that might be true in some cases shouldn't take us away from the fact that there's also a need to respect and to listen to what clients want and to engage with that in dialogue and seriously. You know, sometimes it's about, you know, in terms of these kind of implicit needs, one client said, you know, maybe I'm getting my kind of demands just because I'm put down something on that paper. And I question whether I should have been given the opportunity to be kind of designing, because I am the one who's unwell, who has been unwell. So give me the choice, maybe. And, you know, so some clients themselves ask, you know, say, I'm not sure this is the best thing for me. But again, that's not to say that is true for all clients all of the time. Some clients, a lot of time really do respect like being given some choices. And again, as I was saying before, you know, that some clients don't want to be asked lots of questions. So we need to be pluralistic about pluralism. One client said, you know, as a client, I felt like she would ask me how the session had been for me at the end of every session as a kind of mini review. And I just felt kind of like totally put on the spot and still trying to process whatever we've been talking about. So it kind of took me out of what I've been thinking about, and I lost touch with the process rather than being absorbed in it. And then I do sort of people please thing of trying to be like, yeah, it was really good, really helpful, and really wanted to answer questions. I don't want to say anything was unhelpful, as that feels really uncomfortable. I would never say anything unhelpful. So, you know, this was an example of a client where actually that shared decision making wasn't something that she wanted, and tailoring it important. I guess there's also a risk for therapists of ending up being a bit inauthentic, and clients again picked up on that. One client said, "I think it was an unfair situation on the therapist side that somebody just walks in from the street and gets into the project, which is our pluralistic project, and says, so I want you to behave like this, and this with me." And he's not behaving as he would naturally. So, you know, clients recognise that there is a need for the therapist also to be congruent, to be authentic, and not just to kind of move around like a chameleon. Unless, of course, they're an authentic chameleon, as Lazarus said, and some people are quite happy to be changeable. But if you're not, being pluralistic is not about just kind of constantly stepping outside your comfort zone. It's about recognizing what is your kind of scope of practice within that comfort zone and being able to coordinate. So I hope that's given you some idea of pluralism. As I say, do have a look at our pluralistic practice website. If you're not there already, this video is going to be posted there. And you can see lots of contemporary debates. Do ask questions, join the community, get involved. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I hope you found it interesting.